Once again, it's time for our monthly trip back to 1965. So without further ado, let's take a look at some cool British singles released in June of that year. Let's begin.
And now the song that's currently topping the charts in America, I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones.
Oddly enough, Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones wasn't released in the UK until August 1965. But the single had already come out in the States in June, and by the time it hit British record shops, it had already become a massive hit in America. Many DJs in Britain had bought the single as an import, and by August, the song had already been played in clubs and discotheques across the country. So, even though it technically wasn't out in Britain in June, it absolutely earns its place in this roundup of cool British singles from that month. With its fuzz-toned riff and sneering lyrics about sexual frustration and commercialism, Satisfaction quickly became one of the definitive youth anthems of the era and remains one of the most iconic songs in the history of rock and roll. The main reason the single wasn't released in Britain until August was that Decca Records had just put out a live EP in May, and the label decided to release a new single in the States to coincide with their American tour. The New Musical Express wrote,
"Here it is, the disc which topped the American charts and won a gold disc for the Stones, Satisfaction. Recorded in the States, it opens with a buzzing, rasping guitar which permeates the entire record. Then, in comes Mick Jagger in a hushed whisper which suddenly explodes into full belt with the boys joining in spiritedly. It's highly repetitive and therefore registers quickly. Runs for nearly 4 minutes with rattling tambourine and that insistent nagging guitar riff throughout. Once you've heard it, you just can't lose the extremely simple melody line, perhaps their most compulsive disc to date."
The under-assistant West Coast promotion man was chosen as the B-side in the States.
Under-assistant West Coast promo man.
In Britain, the B-side was a track called The Spider and the Fly.
The spider to a fly, jump right ahead and you're dead.
The single became a massive worldwide hit, reaching #1 in over 15 countries and becoming their first chart topper in the States. In Britain, Satisfaction became their 4th single to reach #1. After the huge success of For Your Love in March 1965, the Yardbirds released a new single in June. Just like their previous 45, Heart Full of Soul was written by Graham Gouldman. Many people consider Norwegian Wood by the Beatles to be the first British pop song to be influenced by Indian music. But Heart Full of Soul, along with See My Friends by the Kinks, released a month later in July, actually introduced those influences earlier. Both tracks brought Indian elements into British pop nearly half a year before Norwegian Wood. In fact, many people consider Heart Full of Soul to be the first psychedelic song ever recorded. Beat Instrumental magazine reported,
The original plan for the Yardbirds disc was to use Indian instruments on it to give an oriental feel. And to this end, manager Giorgio Gomelski hired 2 Indian session men. One was playing a sitar, and the other was playing a tabla, a type of drum. It didn't work out though. Giorgio Gomelski told me, "We even put a board in front of them with instructions on it, but it was no good." Another session was arranged, and this time, lead guitarist Jeff Beck filled in where the sitar would have been. He opens the song with a guitar figure imitating the sound of a sitar, giving it a unique oriental flavor which virtually makes the record. He did this with the aid of a fuzzbox, borrowed from guitarist Jimmy Page.
The B-side was a bluesy instrumental number showcasing Jeff Beck's guitar. The single became a huge success, reaching #2 in Britain and #9 in the States.
And make love to you, darling, one more time.
Van Morrison and Company released their 4th single in June 1965. Their 2 previous 45s had become big top 10 hits, with Here Comes the Night nearly topping the charts. But this single from June didn't even make it into the top 50, and it marked the beginning of their commercial decline. The A-side was One More Time, a moody and soulful composition by Van Morrison. It was a good song, and it featured an excellent and powerful vocal performance by Morrison, but the track felt more like album material than singles material. and that's probably the main reason why it lacked the immediate appeal of their two previous hits. The B-side was written by producer Tommy Scott, using the pseudonym M. Gillan.
How long, baby? Must you treat me like a fool?
The New Musical Express wrote,
On the evidence of their last two releases, the lead singer of Them generates more genuine soul than any of his British contemporaries. The slowly pounding beat ballad One More Time is sung with immense feeling and heart-searching to the accompaniment of an insidious, compulsive riff. Here Comes the Night was an unmistakable smash, and I tipped it as such. This new one is not quite so obvious, but I reckon it'll do equally as well, and rightly so.
Despite the good reviews, the single didn't make the top 50 in Britain, and it also failed to chart in the States. The single achieved its highest chart position in Sweden, where it managed to climb to number 6.
Jack of diamonds, wreck my hand, leave me here to stand. Jack of diamonds is a hard card to play.
Apart from being one of the highlights of June 1965, this single by Ben Carruthers and The Deep also has a fascinating story behind it. The A-side was a collaboration between Carruthers and Bob Dylan.
Jack of diamonds is a high card. Jack of diamonds is a hard card.
The single was produced by Shel Talmy, best known for his work with the Kinks and The Who, and it featured a stellar lineup of musicians, including Jimmy Page on guitar, Nicky Hopkins on piano, and Ian Whiteman on organ, who would later join the action. Ben Carruthers was an American actor who had appeared in films such as Shadows by John Cassavetes. A hip figure in the 1960s scene, Carruthers briefly moved to London after being cast in a BBC play. His circle of friends included Bob Dylan and future Velvet Underground muse Nico. In fact, Carruthers appeared with Nico in this magazine feature from June 1965. During a visit to Bob Dylan at the Savoy Hotel in London, Carruthers asked for some lyrics, and Dylan handed him a piece of paper with a version of the Jack O'Diamonds poem, which had originally appeared on the sleeve of another side of Bob Dylan. Carruthers and a couple of his bandmates set the words to music, and they recorded the track at IBC Studios in London, with Talmy producing and Glyn Johns engineering. The result was a song that blended folk rock with the kind of mod sounds that were dominating the British scene during that period.
Jack of diamonds.
And the track featured a Dylan-type hip vocal by Ben Carruthers, delivered with cool, laid-back swagger.
Jack of diamonds, one-eyed knave, on the move, hitting the street.
The B-side was a track called Right Behind You, a cool, jazzy number that sounded like Mose Allison taking a stroll down Carnaby Street.
Whatever it is you're gonna do, I'm right behind you.
The single got some excellent reviews, and according to press reports from that period, Carruthers performed the song in a BBC play called The Man Without Papers. But unfortunately, just like many TV appearances and programs from that period, the play was erased and taped over and therefore lost forever. The single was not a commercial success, but the A-side was covered by Fairport Convention later in 1968 and featured on their debut album.
So come on, cry to me.
Another highlight from June 1965 was this excellent single by The Pretties. The A-side was a cover of Cry to Me by Solomon Burke. The Pretties offered a version that was quite different from the superb original. It featured dynamic shifts, a reworked rhythm, and a smooth and effortlessly confident vocal performance from Phil May. It was more subdued and nuanced than their previous A-sides, which typically favored a more aggressive kind of sound.
When your babies leaves you all alone.
The B-side was a strong group composition called Get a Buzz. The track featured the sort of gritty sound that characterized their previous singles. The New Musical Express wrote,
Cry to Me opens with Phil May's fascinating hoarse voice and a faint Latin tinge. Then, it swells into a pounding mid-tempo shaker as the title is repeated over and over, with the rest of the pretty things joining in. It didn't really hit me strongly at first, but after 3 spins, I found I was singing along with it. The sound is enveloping, the material insisting and repetitive. It should climb fairly highly.
The single peaked at number 28 in Britain and achieved its highest chart position in the Netherlands, where the band enjoyed enormous popularity, climbing to number 11 on the charts.
Fuzz with fuzz, fuzz with fuzz. Whenever things moving, all I ever hear is.
Chris Farlow didn't score a hit until 1966, when his cover of Out of Time by the Rolling Stones topped the British charts. But the singer, along with his group the Thunderbirds, had been a permanent fixture of the British rhythm and blues scene since the early 60s, performing in clubs such as the Flamingo and the Marquee. This single from June 1965 showcased the group embracing the jazzy rhythm and blues sound that was favoured in venues like the Flamingo Club in Soho.
Doing 90 miles an hour, just driving down the street. The lights were turning red, but I knew I wasn't beat.
The Thunderbirds featured highly respected musicians such as Albert Lee on guitar and future Coliseum member Dave Greenslade on organ, and both musicians were well showcased on the single, with Albert Lee delivering some tasty jazz guitar and Dave Greenslade demonstrating his prowess on the organ. The B-side was a frantic bluesy number called You're the One.
You're the one that I love. Got everything I've been dreaming of.
The track once again featured some standout guitar by Albert Lee. Albert Lee never received the same widespread recognition as players like Eric Clapton, but many people who saw the Thunderbirds in clubs during that period considered him the best guitarist in Britain. The A-side's lyrics painted a vivid portrait of wild, reckless living, running red lights, rolling joints, casual encounters, and gambling in the streets. The group even filmed a promotional video for the track, though it now appears to be lost to time. Despite their efforts to promote the release, the single ultimately failed to make a dent in the charts.
It's not worth crying 'cause you lost your love. The sun is shining up above.
Another good track from June 1965 was this B-side by a group called The. The song featured some great lead guitar work by Jimmy Page. The A-side was a Jagger and Richards composition called Each and Every Day, which also featured Page on guitar.
I miss her, just good night time, arms around me, to the right time.
This was one of many songs that Jagger and Richards gave away to other artists, and the Stones' own version remained unreleased until it appeared on Metamorphosis, a rarities compilation that Decca Records issued in the mid-70s. The group was formed in Hampstead in late 1964 and managed by Reg King, who had previously worked as Brian Epstein's chauffeur and later became Andrew Oldham's bodyguard. His connection with Stones manager Andrew Oldham granted him the opportunity to offer the group a song by Jagger Richards. However, despite Reg King's connections with big names from the British music business, the single went completely unnoticed and became their first and only release.
Somebody help me, please. Tell me what to do.
Both sides of this excellent single by the Boys Blue were written and produced by Mickey Dallon. Interestingly, both songs were later recorded by the Sorrows, who scored a hit a couple of months later with their own version of Take a Heart. The A-side of the Boys Blue single was a fantastic bluesy number called You Got What I Want.
You say that you do. You walk shit down. You're driving me insane, it's only out of my mind.
The B-side, on the other hand, featured the original version of Take a Heart.
You send an SOS. I set my heart in distress.
The fact that the Sorrows recorded both tracks shortly after the Boys Blue released them has led to some confusion among collectors, leading a few to believe the bands were actually one and the same. But they were two distinct bands, and their recordings showcase noticeable differences in sound and approach. The versions by the Sorrows were more stripped down and in your face, while these versions by the Boys Blue were also quite gritty, but a bit more sophisticated, less guitar-based and with horns up front. But this is a superb single and a nice companion to the also excellent versions by the Sorrows. Record Mirror wrote,
Honking backing featuring muffled drums. and the boys fair leap into a breakneck performance. Good and bluesy, with a lot of noise all the way. Both sides are Mickey Dalton compositions. Lots happening.
Despite being well received by the press, the single didn't get much airplay on the radio, and it ended up sinking without a trace. This release by a group called The Untamed is yet another example of a single where the B-side outshone the A-side. Produced by Shel Talmy, the B-side featured a strong pop melody and the kind of mod sound that was dominating the British scene during that period. And once again, this is yet another single which featured Jimmy Page on guitar. The A-side was a decent cover of this classic track by James Brown.
Cause I love you, nobody else.
But of course it didn't come close to matching the power of the original. The single received a fair amount of promotion, including a front-page ad in the New Musical Express, but it garnered mostly lukewarm reviews in the press and ultimately sank without a trace.
Coming in strong, it's the new one from the Yardbirds, Heart Full of Soul.
I hope you enjoyed this trip back to June 1965. See you next time.